Hello, everybody. Artish and Finesse with you on a Tuesday night. How's everybody doing tonight? It's a beautiful night here in Pittsburgh. A balmy 80 or so degrees, Finesse. We're missing you here. How's everything in D.C.?
It's nice. You know, I just took the dog outside. I decompressed a little bit, and I find myself not really in that bad of a mood. I think that what the fans are ready to do, what the players are ready to do, and hopefully what the organization is ready to do, is seize this moment as a moment of clarity. To say, things need to be a little bit different here, and we got the balls to make these changes. And if the organization does that, then maybe long-term, they're better off.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that, it's amazing. I was talking with my friend, we were walking into the game tonight. It's such a thin line. If the Penguins win Game 7, all of a sudden, maybe everything's okay in management's mind and the team doesn't get blown up. We lose Game 7, totally different story. Biles is in all likelihood gone. Key players are probably going to be shown the door. That's how thin the line is. And I don't know that it's such a terrible thing that we lost tonight if it means we're going to be making necessary changes we wouldn't otherwise make.
But is it really that thin of a line? Because if you subscribe to the theory, which we have all season, that this is a very flawed team and a very flawed roster. If you subscribe to that theory, then whether the Pens would have gotten a couple bounces and won this game wouldn't change the underlying facts. This is a very top-heavy team that relies too much on too few people. Those few people are unfortunately proving to be less reliable than we all thought. And it's the same problems creeping again and again. So if the Pens had won this game, it wouldn't necessarily have cured any of those problems. It would have made it more awkward in the offseason to maybe fire a coach who got to the conference finals 2 years in a row. But I think that the end result and the need for change would have been exactly the same had the Pens won this game.
Well, maybe so. We'll never know. But as of right now, there's no ambiguity. As you say, it's a moment of clarity. Things need to change. I happen to think and have thought all along that the primary culprit here, the person most culpable for the state of this team, is Ray Shero. Because we've been saying and banging this drum for the last 12 months how many holes there are in this lineup. And I refuse to believe that those holes couldn't have been filled more efficiently and in a better way than he did. The smaller salary cap notwithstanding. I just feel like it was plain as day that we went into this season with absolutely no depth, no size, no grit on the wings. And, we can talk all we want about Crosby's failure to show up this series, and there's no getting around it. There's no excuse for it. But from my vantage point tonight, every time that guy got the puck, there were two guys right on top of him. There's nobody out there creating any space. It's just a flawed lineup. You're not making the best use of your assets.
Can you imagine if in 2009, Shero had said to Crosby, "Don't worry, Sid, 5 years from now, your wingers are going to be a guy who had no goals in the 2009 playoffs, which is Chris Kunitz. A guy who was a healthy scratch for the majority of the 2009 playoffs, and Pascal Dupuis, who's going to be 34 years old with an ACL injury. And then when he's out, his replacement's going to be a 5'1", 26-year-old with no hands whatsoever. That's going to be your winger. And you're going to have to lead the league in scoring, and then you're going to come into the playoffs and have to deal with exclusive attention from the other team." And like you said, it's not to excuse Crosby, and I don't even want to say the word "but" after, because it sounds like no excuses but. I think if you're wise about this, you can separate Crosby's failure to produce from the fact that for this team to be the competitive team we all want it to be, he's going to need more help around him, and so is everybody else. And it's Shiro, you could trace back like the last 5-6 moves that he's done. They've been terrible. He set this team up in a terrible way. And I don't think you can use a shrinking cap as an excuse because a good general manager foresees that and doesn't do things that put him in trouble when the cap shrinks.
Right. He went balls out last season. And the Penguins were not shy about that fact. They said that that's what they would do. They were loading up for a big run when they had a lot of space under the cap last season. It didn't work out. And in the offseason before this one, they filled out the roster with below par guys. That's what happened. I mean, that's irrefutable. And I think what we're going to see is Bilesman's going to get fired. And you and I have talked about this. It's not that Dan Bilesman is not a good coach. I think he is. But sometimes a change needs to be made. And I don't have any confidence, and I don't necessarily believe that it's the right thing. I haven't quite come to terms with this. But I don't think the management is going to fire Ray Shero. I think Bilesman is the guy that's going to go. And it seems a little bit off to me, given what the hand he was dealt this season.
Yeah,
but I think that's going to happen.
It's unfortunate, but it needs to happen. If you think this team needs an identity change or at least an attitude change, the quickest, most efficient way to do that is to get rid of the coach. I'm of the opinion that it's something that if you sort of like assign everybody in an organization a percentage for how much they constitute the identity of a team, I think if you added up the percentage that a coach and the goalie make up of the identity of the team, that's like 60-70%, just those two things. So if you want to make a change to an organization, that's how you change it. You change the coach. I mean, the Pens changed dramatically when Michael Therrien was fired and Dan Bilesman was hired. And you could changing the coach makes an enormous difference. And this Pens team needs something different. And Bilesman's going to get, if the Pens fired Bilesman tonight, he'd be hired by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And deservedly so. And there would be coaches reasonably lining up to coach the Penguins. It's weird, but that's just how things work in the NHL. So it's time for the Pens to move on from Bilesman.
The obvious thing, it seems to me, is Barry Trotz, given the relationship between Shero and Trotz dating back to Nashville, given Trotz's emphasis on defensive-minded teams. And he never really has had star players to deal with, not star forwards in Nashville. So I think that's a logical candidate. I really haven't thought through who else is out there, but I think it's safe for us to just act like Bilesman's being fired and start the speculation.
I agree. Sebastian tweets us that it's a roster problem. When you don't have depth, there's too much pressure defensively on superstars to perform. And I agree with that completely. I mean, this is a bad roster. This is a roster that is not built to last in the playoffs. And you could say, oh, Jussi Jokinen had 7 goals or Brandon Sutter had 5 goals, whatever. I mean, that's more just sort of like fortunate circumstances that they had those goals. I don't think you can be like, oh, now we have clutch secondary performers, because you can't rely on that. I mean, Sutter had a good Columbus series, and he had 1 goal in this series. Jokinen was fine, but you can't really rely on that guy to be a producer.
Yeah,
it's a crap roster. Go ahead.
I take you back to before the trade deadline. I think that our assessment was we needed 5 players at the trade deadline. When that's the case, when you're going to a trade deadline and thinking to legitimately compete, you need an upgrade in 5 spots. That's a bad sign. You're just not that good of a team.
I think it's just blatantly obvious how flawed this roster is if you just look at the box score and sort of consider what some of the pregame discussion was before this game. So the big thing was like, should Tanner Glass play? Like I was listening to Mark Madden today. A lot of people were calling in saying Tanner Glass should dress. Pens needed Tanner Glass's grit. The very fact that like the Pens have to lean on Tanner Glass, who is literally the worst player in the NHL as long as Taylor Pyatt isn't healthy and playing, that's a huge issue. And then, I'm going to read you the box score. Craig Adams played 6 minutes and 53 seconds. Tanner Glass, 6 minutes and 9 seconds. Marcel Gotch, 8 minutes and 48 seconds. Joe Vitale, 7 minutes and 32 seconds. And that is not a criticism of Dan Bilesma for not playing those guys more minutes. Those guys stink. That's a criticism of Ray Shero giving Dan Bilesma the change that Dan Bilesma has before him to make to adjust to a Game 7 is to bring in a guy who literally sucks so bad that he can't play more than 6 minutes.
Yeah, I want to take the criticism to an even higher level. All the word in the Pittsburgh media right now is that Pittsburgh's ownership is furious about the collapse against the Rangers, furious about the way this team is played. Was the ownership unaware? Was Mario Lemieux, who has been in hockey his whole life, was he unaware that this team was flawed? Is this news? Is this something that is just becoming apparent now? I can't imagine that's the case.
No, I'm sure everyone's frustrated in the moment. We're frustrated in the moment. I'm sure the players are, the coaches are. Although I bet there's some sense of relief from the players that the season's over. They seem like totally disinterested by the end almost. Like they're just ready for the season to be over. So if ownership's upset, then look, I think there are legitimate questions to be asked about Ray Shero, but I don't think Ray Shero is going to get fired. So
no,
I think
they have that in them. I agree.
No, I think that Dan Bilesma is going to get fired.
Yeah,
and he should be, and it should be a joint fire. It should be like one of those things where they do a press conference with him and Ray Shero. Like we all like Dan Bilesma. I like Dan Bilesma. I got no problem with the guy. But it's just time for a different voice in there to try to get something different out of these players.
Can we acknowledge something that you and I have talked about offline for some time? I think it's time that we acknowledge it.
Yeah, this is like the big secret of the last 5 months that we really haven't let anybody else in on. Though it might people might shake their heads and be like, "Oh, that's obvious."
Yeah, well, I feel like if we would have talked about it before now, it would have just been sort of undermining our entire existence. But I think we can say it now. The fact of the matter is we really don't like the Penguins. We do not like this incarnation of the team. We have a hard time rooting for them. We look up and down the lineup. We see guys that we avidly dislike. And I want to start this conversation with James Neal, who is such a different player, I think, than the guy that came over from the Dallas Stars a couple years ago. When he came over from the Stars, I remember thinking, that guy looks like Marian Hossa out there. Even when he wasn't scoring, he was all over the puck. I mean, he was like a hellacious back checker. When we played the Bruins, he was the guy giving Chara fits, just going on the forecheck and just nailing it. And such a presence. And then you add in the sniper's touch. He was really a phenomenal player. And, $5 million a year, it just looked like an incredible, incredible signing for the Penguins, trade and signing. And that's all changed. Because if you watched him tonight, when he didn't have the puck, he's just gliding around up there. He couldn't have been more lackadaisical. And his attitude is of entitlement. I mean, it's sort of like a microcosm of this whole team. He's constantly taking offensive zone penalties. He did it again tonight. He is the least likable player. He's got my vote, and it's a close one, but he's got my vote for least likable Penguin, and I think he is out the door this summer.
I agree with you that he's a hard guy to like. He is not my least likable Penguin. We'll get to that guy in a second. But that Kevin asks on Twitter, can you touch if James Neal is a necessary change? He averages more penalties than goals per game. You would say it's necessary to get rid of James Neal.
I wouldn't say it's necessary. Wait a second. I would not say it's necessary.
Don't let me put words in your mouth.
I do not. I know what you're going to say in rebuttal, and it's a great point. I know that he averages more goals per game than probably every winger in the league except two over the last couple of years. But he is emblematic of everything that is wrong with this team right now. And I think you need to shop him and see what you can get. I bet you can get a lot.
I agree you could get a lot, but I think he still has incredible value for the Penguins. And I am not going to give up on James Neal without seeing whether a different coach can get more out of him. Like, I'll just reveal, the player that frustrates me the most, and a lot of people think it might be Brandon Sutter, it's actually Chris Letang. The guy drives me absolutely insane. He makes me nuts. The difference between Letang and Neal, as I see it, is that one makes $5 million and the other makes $7.25 million. And I get that Neal is a flawed player. I get that he's hard to root for. He frustrates me. He disappoints in the playoffs. He's confounding because he has like an unbelievable goal-scoring touch that disappears at times, and he takes terrible penalties and actively hurts his team. But I don't think you give up on a guy who can score 40 goals and isn't, he could score 40 goals and he only costs $5 million. He's not a 40-goal scorer who is the face of the franchise, captain, best player. You have like a secondary player who can score 40 goals and only cost you $5 million. That's incredibly valuable. And I don't think you shop that, because if you trade him and get other pieces, how efficient would those pieces have to be to match the efficiency that you get out of James Neal, which is like 35, 40 goals for $5 million? I just don't think that's a realistic swap to get rid of him.
What if you could get Ryan Kessler making $5 million a year and a deal for James Neal? Would you do it?
Well, so then what? You have Crosby, Malkin, and Ryan Kessler playing with like a lineup full of Lee Stempniaks?
Well, no. This is you're talking about a Neal trade in a vacuum, but I'm talking about a Neal trade as one of many moves this offseason to re-engineer this roster.
I don't think that trading one of the two good wingers you have on your team, one of the two legitimate top six wingers, and maybe arguably the only one on your team who's a top six winger. Because Kunitz, you could certainly make the case that he's a Crosby creation. He's only a top six if he's playing with Crosby. I don't think you improve your team by trading the only legitimate top 3 or 4 winger you have on your team. Unless you get an incredible return. And he's only like 25. He could mature. And I think you have to give him the chance to play with a different coach before you give up on James Neal. If you want to trade James Neal after next season, if he plays like this again next year in the playoffs and continues with the penalties, then I'm fine. I'm on board. But I think that's premature this season.
Perhaps you raise a good point about Kunitz. What about Kunitz being shopped this offseason? He's 34 years old. I'm not sure when he turns 35, but you're going to have to, I think, if you want to create a new kind of Penguins team, you're going to have to move some of these guys. You can't keep the core. You're going to have to shake it up a little bit. I am not a believer that just bringing in a new coach is going to be, a total panacea for this team. I just don't see it. I think it's still a flawed roster. And in order to fill holes, you're going to have to deal guys that play prominent roles. So if not Neal, who are you going to trade?
Well, the guy I'd love to trade is Chris Letang. He is the one that frustrates me the most. And I don't know whether a trade is really realistic or not. But I look at Chris Letang as a guy who has the physical tools to be worth $7.25 million. He screws up almost every little thing during a game. And I'll just point to like the last 5 minutes of the third period, where the Pens are in the offensive zone on a great cycle. And the puck comes out to Letang at the point, and it's bouncing, and he's along the boards. And rather than catching the puck, putting it down on the ice, and slapping it back into the corner, he slaps it out of midair into the meshing. And then it's a whistle when the faceoff comes out of the zone. It's a little thing. The guy does almost every little thing wrong. There's a difference between a guy who makes $7.5 million and a guy who is a $7.5 million defenseman. And Chris Letang screws things up like that up all of the time. With 2 minutes left in the game, There's nobody around him. He's skating up the ice. He's 5 feet short of the red line. He takes a slap shot in and it's icing. Gain the effing red line, dude. Like, what are you doing? Why are you so dumb? I got someone, like, one of our commenters got crazy on me last year because I called Letang dumb. If you watch Chris Letang play, he makes like 7 or 8 super dumb plays every single game. And, like, you can point to look at his Corsi, or look at how he breaks the puck out of the zone. That's all great. But if you want to be, like, the number one anchor of a team's defense, you can't screw up all the little things. You have to be reliable. You have to be stoic. You cannot, he is like the definition of scrambly and unreliable and chaotic and high risk. That is not worth $7.25 million. I would get him out the door as quick as I can. And I will add this one last point. He is a liability on the power play. He's not a good power play defenseman. If your $7.25 million defenseman can't even be on the power play because he's not a good point man, what are you paying him for?
I just want to see the scouting report, because there's got to be one out there somewhere where some scout is looking at a young player and says, you know what this guy has going for him? He's stoic.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Look at the guys look at the top $7 million defensemen. Compare them to Chris Letang. It's not even close.
Yeah.
It's not even close. And look, if you want to go back to 2009 and sort of look at how things got from 2009 to 2014, where we're in a very negative environment. We went from very optimistic to super pessimistic. And you want to put a graph together that shows the correlation of the increased pessimism of the team with some variable. What's that variable? It's not Crosby being the best player. It's not Malkin being the best player. It's not even Fleury. It's not Bielsma. It's the increased reliance on Chris Letang as the Pens' number one defenseman. When the Pens won the Cup in 2009, he was the 6th defenseman. He was not an integral part of that team. He was like a great complementary piece because he was young and super talented and not relied on to do that much. Ever since the Pens branded him and presented him as if he's the future anchor of the defense, the team has become more and more disappointing every single year, and he's been a glaring problem in every single one of the failures.
Yeah, there's no question they got a little intoxicated with his raw physical skills and have overlooked, in our view, for far too long, at least one season too long, his deficiencies. And, I think we'll probably go to our graves thinking about what would have happened if they just would have traded Chris Letang last summer, what the haul could have been. Could have remade the whole roster.
You can't say that this team would have been worse this year had they traded Chris Letang last season. And that the outlook would be worse.
It would have been better.
The outlook would be better.
Yeah.
There's no question.
So let me ask you this question, because you seem to be on a bit of a roll tonight. I hope that this is cathartic for you. Fleury has 1 year left on his contract at $5 million. My view is this team still can't possibly be that confident playing in front of him. He had a couple really good games this playoff year, but he also let in an inordinate amount of deflating goals, as he has done again and again over the past several seasons. Question is, what can we do about it? We've got nothing else to go on besides Fleury. How do you turn over the goaltender position this offseason if that's something you think it's necessary to do?
Well, his name should be Marc-Andre Deflation. He gives up really bad goals. Although tonight he was fine. But you can't judge him just on tonight. You can't judge any single player just on tonight. Here's what I wouldn't do. I think the most important thing with Fleury...
I can judge Tanner Glass just on
I can judge Tanner Glass. I judge Tanner Glass after one game. I'm sold on that.
I could judge him on practice.
Here's what I wouldn't do with Fleury. I would not extend Marc-Andre Fleury's contract. So he's expired. He's done after this season. If you can't, I would shop him. But if you can't get a good deal, whatever you do, don't. I would say sure. Don't feel the need that you need to stroke his sensitive, stroke his whatever. I don't know. The words escaping me. Stroke whatever. Think about, use your imagination. Stroke his whatever. Stroke whatever you want. All right? Don't feel like you need to soften the blow on him by extending, like giving him some contract extension. Do not do that because he could easily screw up next season's playoffs. Like
that's bad business.
If you keep him and he plays great and then you can't afford him, terrific. That means he played great last year. Fine. Goodbye. Thanks for your service. Do not extend the guy. Like that's what the Pens did with Kunitz and with Dupuis, and that could end with Letang, and that could really, all three of those contracts could really come back and hurt the Penguins.
But are you saying you ride with him next season?
No, I would get rid of him. I think, like I said before.
That's my question. What are you going to do? You're saying you're going to get rid of him. How do you replace him with somebody better?
Well, you look at the free agent list, and you just find somebody.
There's going to be a free agent you'd rather have?
Yeah, look, I don't think Fleury's
Call up the free agent.
I'm pulling it up right now. Look, we got to look at the Fleury that we expect to show up in next season's first round. And I don't think it's that hard to find a goalie who you would have the same expectations for in next season's first round as with Fleury. You can't look at this guy as like, oh, he was good in like Game 5 in 2008 in the finals.
Let's hear your replacement for Fleury. I'll say this. I mean, you can't take anything away from Lundqvist. Tonight is a perfect example of why you don't let a series like this go to 7 games. If you would have flipped goalies in this series, the Rangers would have had absolutely no chance. I mean, Lundqvist was by far the best player on the ice this series.
Right.
By far.
And that's the one thing I'd bring up to anybody who defends Fleury is like, what would your if you're writing a series preview and the Pens are about to go against Fleury in the playoffs, how excited would you be about that? I mean, you'd be thrilled. You'd be like, the Pens are going to score 7 goals every single game. Look, I'm pulling up the list. So you got that backup in San Jose, Alex Stalock, .932 save percentage. Brian Elliott, 29 years old, unrestricted free agent. You got Chad Johnson, the backup in Boston. Look, I think Boston inflates goalies' numbers because of how good they are defensively.
Wait a second. Let me just stop.
Justin Peters, Al Montoya. I mean, these guys all had better seasons than Fleury. I don't know why you think Fleury's that good.
This is where we're going to part ways. I agree completely. I would like a better alternative to Fleury. But if you're going to try to sell me on Justin Peters and Al Montoya as my playoff goaltender, I'm going to just stick with Fleury. Thanks very much.
I'm not.
If there's nobody that's markedly better,
all right,
I'm going to stick with it.
That
doesn't make any sense to me.
Let's say you get but here's where it makes sense. All right, let's say you get Justin Peters. I'm pulling up his salary right now. Hang on one second. All right, he made $550,000 this year. Let's say you get Justin Peters for $1.5 million next year. And now you have $3.5 million to spend on another defenseman. And as long as that $3.5 million isn't Rob Scuderi, you don't think that improving the quality of the defense could level out the difference between Justin Peters and Marc-Andre Fleury? Like, I'm not sure that Fleury is better than him.
Wait a second. You just got done telling me that the goalie is 75% of the team in the playoffs.
I'm saying 75% of the identity of the team.
You want 75% of your team's identity to be Justin Peters?
I'm not saying Justin Peters. I'm saying Justin Peters.
Somebody give this man his own team.
I'm saying we need Justin Peters.
I don't know. We'll see how this plays out.
No, what I'm saying is if you don't need to pay Fleury $5 million, if you could pay someone else to almost score on himself, you could pay someone $2 million to almost score on himself. And then you use that $3 million so that Sidney Crosby doesn't have to skate with Brian Gibbons in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think if our only two options are Fleury and Justin Peters, maybe we just forfeit.
No, you signed Justin Peters for $1.5 million. You're a cap expert. You're a capologist. I'm surprised that you're not more that you're not more analytical about this.
I don't know enough about Justin Peters to say for sure, which tells me pretty much all I need to know about Justin Peters. If Justin Peters had proven himself in any way, shape, or form, we could have this conversation. Who is Justin Peters? How long has he been in the league?
That's
why are we having this conversation while I'm in the dark about Justin
originally
Peters?
that Ayn Rand book, it wasn't John Galt, it was Justin Peters. That was going to be the name. So the whole book was going to be, who is Justin Peters?
Yeah, I don't know. I would like somebody with a little more pedigree. If we've got this kid Gibson from Anaheim in the Letang trade that we should have made last offseason, I could have bought into that. But, some journeyman backup as a replacement for Fleury, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm for it. I mean, teams, you can win the cup without a franchise goalie, a so-called franchise goalie.
Okay, when's the last time that happened?
Corey Crawford won the cup last year.
But then they turned him into their franchise.
Exactly. That's the same thing with Fleury, same thing with Jonathan Quick. You sign a guy, he performs above his contract level, and then you overpay him. That's what happened. I mean, that's the formula for goalies. So let's go back to getting the cheap goalie. He can win a cup. Then we can pay him $8 million a year. He can shit the bed for 6 years. Then we get another cheap goalie and repeat the cycle.
But give me somebody at least with some pedigree, okay? Like Tuukka Rask had a lot of pedigree when he took over.
All right, Brian Elliott.
Like that.
Brian Elliott's not bad.
What? I mean, that guy's been around a long time. If
he's 29. He's the same age as Fleury.
No, you need a starter in waiting. You don't need.
All right, Yaroslav Halak. Get Yaroslav Halak.
Well, that you might be able to talk me into because he at least has a history of success in the playoffs.
What about Jeff Zatkoff?
What about Jeff? Well, we know he has the leadership. We know he has the character. All right, let me just ask you one other question. Okay, we don't want to go on too long here because I'm afraid you might burst a blood vessel. What about Brandon Sutter? What do we do in the offseason with Brandon Sutter? You can't deny that, and this isn't saying a lot, but he was one of our better forwards in the playoffs. He's a restricted free agent. Is there any way that you would consider keeping Brandon Sutter, and at what number?
I consider myself a restricted fan because Brandon Sutter is on the Penguins. I can't fully embrace this team as long as he's on it. What number? I wouldn't give him more than he makes now. The guy had like 26 points this season. Well, I don't think he's hard to play against. The whole thing about the Penguins is we're so soft, we're so easy to play against, blah, 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 blah. Crosby and Malkin they're super talented guys. They're never going to be like hard, gritty guys to play against. So you don't bring out a third-line center who bends from the waist.
Do you think people are listening to this podcast thinking, why is Finesse yelling at me?
I'm just saying, like, I don't think that we should look at Brandon Sutter like scoring a goal off of Calvin Klein's foot as, establishing him as some sort of clutch performer. I think you have to look at the bigger body of work. And the bigger body of work is that the guy is not that effective. Now, he had crap line mates, but you put a guy with Brandon Sutter. So Brandon Sutter has crap line mates. You're like, oh, Brandon Sutter, he'd be better if he's playing with better players. But then as soon as you put James Neal with Brandon Sutter, you're like, oh, well, now James Neal has crappy line mates. He would be performing better if he was still with Malkin. So I would get rid of Sutter. I don't know the restricted free agent rules that well. If you could move him and get anything for him, I would do it. I think the guy is a bust.
Let me bottom line this for you and for all our listeners out there. I would be fine if everybody on our team was gone except for Malkin, Crosby, and Paul Martin next season. I would have no problem turning over this roster to that degree if we got the proper assets in return. That's how little I like this roster as currently constructed. There's nobody that means that much to me. There's nobody I think, oh, no, we can't let that guy go. Nobody else. What about you?
Yeah, there's not. I guess
you're untouchable.
I guess you wouldn't want to move Ole Mata. You kind of want to see what he can bring to the table.
No, fair. That's fair.
But it's not like we can't pretend that Ole Mata is going to be like some super stud in the NHL. I mean, I think what he proved this year is that he has the capability to be a very solid defenseman. The difference is like you look at Jordan Staal, the dude had 29 goals as a rookie and never matched that again. He never sort of progressed to a greater player than he was in his rookie year. I'm not saying that Mott is never going to get better, but I don't think you could be like, you could look at his rookie year and be like, oh, he's going to be like 10% better every year until he's 27 years old and Nick Lidstrom.
Yeah, but I think your point is well taken that you don't trade the upside.
No, you don't, because there's who else do you have that has upside?
Exactly. You keep the upside. You trade anybody else you want to trade.
Bob on Twitter, his hashtag or his name is Just Some Jobber, points out that things are bad when you're having a 20-minute conversation about Justin freaking Peters.
That's a good point, Bob.
Yeah.
Speaking of Bob Bortuzzo really made a name for himself in that first period. I felt like he had the puck more than anybody else in the first period. I thought maybe this was Bob's night.
Yeah, well, I think Bob's best days are probably ahead of him.
Yeah, I don't trade Bob. Keep Bob's upside.
No, I think that you keep Bob. It's fun to watch. Like, you got to entertain the fans for 82 games, and Bob's a big part of that.
I feel like Marcel Gotch has a lot more that he can show.
Yeah, I would say so. Let me just get through a couple more of these tweets. We got like
all right.
8 minutes before we run out of time here.
Okay.
Let's see. We got we touched on Kevin's tweet. Lyle thinks the call on Neal tonight was awfully soft. The offensive zone interference. I guess, but like the call on Crosby was kind of soft too, right before it, so kind of washes out, right? I mean,
listen. These game sevens, man. You give up that first goal, prepare for a tackle football game. Against a team like the Rangers, this is just what happens, and you're not going to win with your power play in a game 7. And you just have to fight through it.
David asks a good question. Who do you pull for the rest of the playoff? Who do you root for the rest of the playoffs? Montreal, the Kings, Bruins, Rangers, Ducks, Hawks.
I think you got to go with the Pittsburgh kid, Gibson, don't you?
Yeah, I guess you maybe root for Anaheim. I would hate to play against Montreal, but I certainly want them to beat the Bruins. I'm not ever going to root for the Rangers. I'd be all right if the Kings won.
Yeah, I'd like to see Anaheim and Bruce Boudreau beat Montreal in the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
That'd be satisfactory.
Alicia wants to keep Brandon Sutter around. We addressed that. Let's see. Greg asks, who do we have as a goalie? Well, Justin frickin' Peters, obviously, is going to be our goalie. Brian asks, do the Pens suck ass? I think.
Do they suck ass?
Yeah.
Wow. Isn't that is the question, Brian?
And then Brian also asks, can the Pens do anything to get rid of Scuderi or Fleury next year? I hope they do everything they can to get rid of both of them. Especially Scuderi.
If somebody could trade Scott Gomez in a $7 million a year contract, then anybody could be traded. Nothing would surprise me. You might find a general manager who thinks Rob Scuderi's leadership is just indispensable. He has to have it. We should only be so lucky.
The idea that Ray Shero spent 4 years drafting nothing but defensemen and failing to get any help at the wing for Crosby and Malkin, and then had to sign Rob Scuderi because he didn't have defensemen that he could call up, is like the biggest indictment of Ray Shero ever.
That was a disaster. Go back and look at our post, no contract for old men, from last summer.
Yeah. I am excited to see Dupuis come back, though. I like Pascal Dupuis. He would have made a difference, but like at this point in the season, you can't consider that an injury loss because, every team has guys that are out for the year.
Yeah.
I want to end with one. I want one final thought. We have 4 minutes left. I got one final thought. Do you believe that the reason the Pens lost this series is the curse of Taylor Pyatt?
You're saying Taylor Pyatt's curse permeates the organization even when he's a healthy scratch?
Well, I'm saying the Rangers identified Taylor Pyatt as a guy who sucked.
Exercised him.
They exercised him. Right. They lanced him like a boil on the skin. Then the Penguins inexplicably.
He possessed the Penguins.
For no reason at all. I don't care how many people are injured. There is no reason to sign Taylor Pyatt. The Penguins,
maybe Taylor Pyatt's a demon. Maybe he was exercised by the Rangers and he possessed the Penguins. Maybe it wasn't the Penguins that took action to sign him. Maybe he inhabited the Penguins. Maybe that's the proper way to look at this.
Something was inhabiting Ray Shearer's mind to sign Taylor Pyatt and pay him like $2 million this year. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous. And that's the type of, if you want the biggest indictment of Shearer, and I've already said 5 different things are the biggest indictment of Shearer, but to me, you could justify building a roster around very high-end talent. What you can't then do if you build a roster like that is whiff on 18 different guys to fill out the roster. And that's what Shearer did. He whiffed on every bargain piece that a team built on high-level talent would need to fill out a roster.
Listen, here's what I want you to do. Do you have a bathtub?
Yeah, I do have a bathtub.
Go take a nice bath. Make yourself a cup of tea.
I'm going to draw a bath.
Put a hot towel on your forehead. Put your feet up. Take some deep breaths. I want you to relax. Put this all behind you.
Well, the interesting thing is, I don't feel, I'm not upset.
He's not coming back. Taylor Pyatt's not coming back.
Good. I'm not upset. I just feel passionate because I feel like I have clarity on what needs to happen.
Yeah. Look, there's a reason we call this the Raw Emotion Podcast.
That's right.
That's what we're all about. Listen, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been a very unusual and often dispiriting season, but at least we went through it together. We'll see you next time. GTOG.